welcome to the Dream Journal. From the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, California, the Dream Journal is a weekly show where we explore the healing powers of your nighttime dreams through conversations with dream experts and with you. In the words of Carl Jung, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Today's music is called Contra Nominus. Have you ever lost a loved one to a controlling group? Whether around religion, self-improvement, or politics, such losses can be devastating. Today we have a conversation with author and cult recovery educator, Gerette Buglion. I am your host, Catherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork, and welcome to the Dream Journal. Okay. So the Dream Journal is also a weekly podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review. But most importantly, tell your friends. Archives are available at the KSQD website at ksqd.org/the-dream-journal. Look for the Dream Journal and let your friends know about it. That really does help people find the show, and it gives you an opportunity to talk about dreaming. Okay, well, Gerette Buglion is author of An Everyday Cult, a memoir which shows how her innocent quest for meaning left her open to manipulation by a controlling dream teacher. Gerette's current work is in cult recovery and education. Her signature writing course, called Writing to Reckon, offers a safe space for cult survivors to share their stories. She is a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement, whose mission is to encourage people who have experienced cultic abuse to tell their stories. She also has a podcast called Everyday Cults, Everyday People. You can find Gerette at GeretteBuglion.com or igotout.org, and Gerette is spelled GeretteBuglion.com. I'll tell you a little bit about a dream that I've been mulling over. So in this dream, I have been stranded by a shipwreck at a wedding reception. So it's kind of an interesting mixture of symbols. But the key thing that I'm mulling over is that two things happening that I don't like. One is that I've been given a dress that is super floofy. It has these weird fluffy sleeves that I don't like. And the other is that I'm sitting at a child's table, but my seat is so low that like my eyes are level with the top of the table. I'm mulling over what is it that I'm accepting that I don't really want to accept, and like where do I feel like I'm in the floofy dress that I don't enjoy. Okay, Gerette Buglion, hello.
Hello, Catherine.
Okay. Glad to get you on the air. So Gerette, I know you had some trouble with the audio, but I just read your bio, and you have been on the show, and I was amazed to see twice before. I remember you were on once before, but this is now your third appearance, and it's so good to have you back. I feel like you're kind of one of those friends of the show. We talked a lot about your book, Everyday Cults, Everyday People, and then we also talked about the ethics of dream sharing, which are both topics that I'm very, very interested in. And just to start with kind of a check-in, like, how are you doing right now? What's going on for you?
Well, I'm really so delighted to be here, and I also feel like I am a friend of the show, this being my third time. Thank you for your generosity, Catherine.
Yeah.
Because the group that I was involved in, and I write about in my book, An Everyday Cult, did use dreams as a form of manipulation. It's a beautiful thing that you who are so passionate about dreams are willing to look at the ethics of this with such openness and scrutiny. And I just so deeply, deeply respect that in you and the way that you operate. So thank you for that.
Right. Well, one of the things has been to sort out the beneficial aspects of this situation from the ones that were not so beneficial. Like, one of the things we want to talk about today is like losing people to controlling groups, and controlling groups can cover a lot of territory. I listed 3 different things: religion, self-improvement, politics, and I'm sure you can think of others. And I want to say, can you maybe help us a little bit here about what defines a controlling group? What does that mean?
A controlling group, from my perspective, is one in which there's a doctrine or some kind of code or structure that is a compelling part of, or a requirement, actually, to membership. And sometimes that requirement is overt, like as in you have to sign a doctrine or sign a contract and all that. And sometimes that requirement is actually more hidden and not quite as visible. And yet the controls can exist nonetheless. And there can be all kinds of actually good reasons for groups to have mechanisms of control. It's not that control itself is bad. In fact, it's necessary for safety and survival. And, as we kind of care for each other in day-to-day life, it's more when the controls actually start creating harm in one way or another to the individuals involved. And oftentimes that harm can actually be not so easy to recognize. It might be, sometimes it's easier for people outside of the group to see that are people that are being hurt, where people within the group don't recognize it, don't see it.
Right, because there are good things in these groups, like having a faith in God and having self-improvement. That these things can be very empowering, and so there can be a way that I feel like I am getting something out of it. But maybe I'm having to wear a floofy dress. I don't know if you were able to come online and hear about my dream I shared, which I'm only just now realizing. Well, I'll just do a quick summary, which is that my dream actually is kind of about controlling groups, and that I'm shipwrecked at a wedding reception, and I find I'm wearing a dress that I don't like. Somebody has given me this dress, and it's just, I just don't like it. It's floofy, and it's like little girlish, in fact, but in a kind of a dorky way. I don't know. I just don't want to be wearing it. And yet I'm still sitting there, and I'm at this kids' table, and the table is so high that it's up to my nose, and it's just like this all really uncomfortable situation, but I don't leave. I don't know what to do about it. And I think sometimes, we get into a situation where we're like, okay, I'm getting some help here, and this is improving, like the self-improvement kind of occult is, or even I'm thinking one-on-one relationships can be controlling groups. Like I'm getting something out of this relationship. And I don't know, is it really such a big deal that I'm wearing this weird dress? Like maybe I can put up with the dress. And so like when does it become damaging to the people in the cult? Like at what point do I get to say, no, I want to wear what I want to wear? When do we make that difference? I wonder if you have some thoughts about that. It's kind of a balance between what we're getting from the relationship and what we're having to give up.
Yeah, that's a great observation and kind of a wild dream,
isn't it?
That's very cool. And yet I can really identify with that feeling. I think for many years in the group that I was a part of, I felt very similarly, sitting at a table, being the good girl, being well behaved, and yet there's, I have a floofy dress on, or I have some, for me, I think it was more, there were things that just were not natural for me, that I was tweaking myself to be able to fit in. And you ask about what happens, like how is it that when can we see that we're being harmed in the group? And that's a really interesting question. It's very different for different people have very different experiences. It's a wide gamut here. And yet, like sometimes people can recognize that, it's like seeing somebody else getting hurt.
Right.
Can actually be more of, like a wake-up call. And for me, that was my experience. I was involved for 18 years before I could actually see that someone else was getting hurt. And then that helped me to wake up to the ways that I had been hurt. And like I said, it's different for everybody. But I think the word indoctrination needs to come in here, because indoctrination is a process that takes time. Certainly it can be speeded up in situations now where people are actually being radicalized very quickly, for example, through online and really intensive social media kind of groups. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that.
Of course.
I'm just getting over COVID. So bear with me if my voice is strange.
Of course, I'm so glad that you could be. Just take all the time you need. I can ramble on if you need to take.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Catherine. Good. Appreciate that. So
indoctrination is what we were talking about.
Indoctrination, like to understand how it is that a group can actually capture someone's capacity for discernment, someone's autonomy, someone's values. And that it can be very often kind of a slow process of erosion. So you don't really see that happening, and you kind of buy into the group because you are getting good things out of it.
Right.
Like you said before, like there are beautiful things in self-help and in religion, and and I think it's very important to honor and give space for these. And since today we had kind of picked that focus around, what is it to have a loved one who gets involved in a controlling group, and how do we reckon with that? There's that perspective, like I've had many people say to me, in my work with clients, like, like, I don't understand how, my sister, my brother, my aunt, my, best friend is involved in this thing. It's just obviously so wrong and so bad for them.
Right.
And I guess maybe we could pause and just ask, like, Catherine, do you identify with that experience? Do you have anybody that you know of who's, kind of got involved in something that you can see or that you believe is not good for them, and yet there they are still involved?
Right.
Can you identify with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I can. And I want to draw a parallel between you being in the cult and not recognizing the harm until you saw somebody else undergoing harm, to people being in cults and the loved ones. Their loved ones are the first ones who can see that they are being harmed, that there's something that we don't recognize, harm in ourselves often. And yes, I definitely have people in my life, loved ones, who have situations that I'm really not comfortable with, and I don't believe that they're helping that person either. But it's like one of these things that it's not my place to say. And even though if there's harm, that I can hold them in love as best I can, and maintain a relationship. That for me has been really key, is maintaining a relationship, even if it means not talking about the difficult subjects. And that and maybe if there's a little space for that, then I can have a little conversation. But mostly, just finding what I do have in common with that person and not giving up on the person, the loved one, because it's really sad and it's kind of scary to see people embracing ideas that just don't make any sense at all to me. And yet I know that that's the same person that I loved all along. And so can I still keep what I have in common with them to the fore whenever we interact, so I don't lose the relationship. I'm a little bit hyper loyal that way, that I don't ever want to lose a relationship. I find relationships so precious. I'm a bit of an introvert. At least I'm going to have to lose that story about myself, but I've always thought of myself as an introvert. And I will say that my friendships, whether they're few or many, are precious to me, and I don't want to give them up.
Yeah.
And and I even if I see them going down a path that doesn't make sense to me, I feel like I want to hold space for them in my heart as best I can.
Yeah. That is, I absolutely applaud, everything you just said, Catherine. This way of valuing relationships, like even when it's challenging. And people today, and, we can even just focus on here in the United States in particular, people are experiencing, a very high level of polarization and differing ideas. And to do what you just described, of maintaining the relationships, focusing on where there might be some link, some similarity, something that you still hold near and dear, that is so important. And holy cow, it is not an easy thing to do.
It's not.
Especially now. So it's very, very important. And I think one of the ways that we can, when we're in that situation where someone we love becomes so alienated from us that we don't really know how to maintain that relationship, it's important that we also really take care of ourselves.
Right, that's very true.
That we have to also hold boundaries. Sometimes we have to make some really hard decisions. And at times not communicate, even though that can challenge the relationship.
Right.
And that, and yet it's this, it's a constant dance. It's a constant dance. And I think, I love your phrase being hyper loyal, because what I can tell you, and I want all of your listeners to hear this, that kind of loyalty to someone you care about, whose ideas are so different from yours, and you feel like you've lost them. That hyper loyalty has the potential to literally save their life.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's not a small thing.
I wonder if you have any examples that you'd like to share or like ideas of how to relate to people who have been in this situation. I also just want to quick say we have a caller, but I'm going to wait in a few minutes, so just hang on the line, Susan. We'll be with you in just a few minutes, so hang in there. So Gerette, I'm just wondering if you will have any more suggestions about the loved one who has gone over to, I hate to say the dark side, but there's a side that I can't relate to anyway.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I think we have a beautiful sentiment that Dr. Steve Hassan, who's a kind of a world-renowned expert in cult dynamics, something that he often says, which is, love is stronger than mind control. So when someone you love has been lost to something, and you hear them, you see that they've changed. You see that they're not they're not the person you knew them to be, because they've taken on these ideas, be it religious,
wait a minute.
be it political.
I'm sorry, I got to jump in, because not the person I thought I knew them to be. That that feels a little edgy to me. Like, are they really a different person, or are they under influence in a way? Or like, what do we, but we could go down the rabbit hole of personhood. What does that mean to be a person? I'm sorry.
Right, that's
I couldn't
a great
help
question.
myself.
No, good. I love it.
Okay.
Catherine. Well, one of the things that is important for people to keep in mind when we're talking about controlling groups and cult dynamics is that people who have truly been indoctrinated into a system, they do go through a profound change. Their behaviors can change.
Oh, I see
the
what
way
you're saying.
that they the way that they interact with the world can change. I experienced that myself. I mean, if you talk to people, for example, there are many. I have a wonderful women's group who I was a part of all throughout the 18 years that I was involved in the group, and they would talk among themselves about the weird things that Gerette was doing and the way that she was changing and making choices that didn't seem like her. So we actually talk about when we're in the cult recovery process, we talk about accessing our pre-cult identity.
Oh.
And that is actually a really healing part, or an important part of our recovery process, to say, oh, that's the person I was before I said yes to this. And of course, this is a different scenario when someone is born into a controlling religion or a controlling group of some kind. So, I think that's another discussion, which I'm, very happy to have as well. But I just needed to kind of pin that there.
Right.
So, this question of personhood, yes, we all get to change, and then there also are core aspects of who we are that has a kind of impermanence, or kind of what are the words that are enduring, so that we can get involved in something new and exciting, and yet we do it so in a truly authentic way, where we're bringing our critical thoughts to the table, and we're engaging in a way that all of us gets to, be involved.
Right.
Where in a controlling group, there are rules that exclude core parts of who a person is.
When you talk about the critical thinking faculties, it makes me think of the phrase "thought-stopping cliche," and that one of the hallmarks of a controlling group is that there are certain phrases that are like, "Oh, this is just how it is," and like it doesn't invite critical thinking.
Exactly, and when you hear something like, oh, that's your problem. Or, if you dig deeper, or if you stick with the program, then you'll get through this, blip that you're on right now. This, can't you see? It's actually like in a controlling group, it's always your fault. Anything that's wrong is your fault.
Right.
So I feel aware that there's also somebody waiting on the line. So I want to invite others into the conversation.
Great. Well, let's.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. In fact, I think we have two callers on the line at the moment, Susan and Veronica. Okay, this is the Dream Journal, and this is broadcast live from the KSQD studios in Santa Cruz. My name is Catherine Bell, and my guest today is Gerette Buglion, and we're talking about losing a loved one to a controlling group, and how can you support that person, and how can you work through your own feelings around that. And we have at least one caller on the line. I think it's Susan. If you're there, Susan, hello. Are you there?
Hi, this is Veronica.
Oh, it's Veronica. Hi. I think maybe we lost Susan. I'm sorry. But Veronica, I'm so glad that you called. So good to have you on the show. What can we do for you? What is up for you?
Well, I was very pleased to hear this topic being addressed. And for a long time, I have wanted to have conversation with someone about what ties a person to a controlling group and what is needed for that person to get out.
Right.
Because in the late 70s, early 80s, I became enmeshed with a self-starter controlling group in Berkeley. And it took me 8 years to extricate myself from their tendrils, their control into my finances, into where I lived. And I finally achieve that, I left the country. I bought a one-way ticket to Amsterdam, and I left. And when I look back, the thing that was holding me there was, I was lonely, and my need for approval. And need for approval is really key. And I've looked at that over the years and over the decades, and as long as I needed approval, I was disempowered. I would be polite and I was good, and all those things. And when I would try to speak up, I would be talked to without end and without the ability to interrupt for hours and hours on end. So I'll pause. There's one other thing I want to say, but I'll pause because there's a lot here.
That is a lot, Veronica. Oh, my goodness. I'm so glad you called. Gerette, what can you offer here?
Oh, first off, Veronica, I so appreciate that you called. I am sorry to hear about your experience. Particularly sorry to hear that you had that in order to really set yourself free from this group, you had to leave the country. And what I can assure you is that you are not the only one. I mean, I certainly know others who have had to do exactly the same thing, to distance themselves in very significant ways in order to regain their own agency. And I think that you also hit on a really important point in terms of the loneliness and the need for approval. And, we are wired for relationship. It's just part of the human reality. And what happens in a controlling group is that need is actually is harnessed, is manipulated in order to meet either the leader's gain to benefit others than the individuals. And how we can tell, whether or not it's a healthy environment, it's kind of a balancing of the scales. Like look at, in what ways, to seriously ask yourself, how am I benefiting from this group? And that can be a tricky thing because, of course, when one is indoctrinated, we see everything as beneficial.
About the group, yeah.
But if you look specifically that, okay, how are my finances being impacted? How is my quality of life being impacted? How about my time? How much time do I have for things other than the group? How about my relationships? Mm-hmm. Like, how is this group supporting my most important relationships? And oftentimes people will realize, actually, I feel more cut off from, my birth family, my parents, my children, whatever it might be, because the group actually creates that sever, and the group demands so much of the time, even though there might be the pretense of that time being given willingly for the good cause. It still is a time suck, and then, true, like on every level, like, how about my overall quality of life, and how about my finances? Mm-hmm. What percentage of my finances are devoted to this group? Mm-hmm. And if it's more than, 5%, that's something to really look at.
So
I was also,
Veronica, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
I was also told, at various points, I rounded up the energy and confidence to try to extricate myself. And I've heard said that it takes an abused woman 5 times to leave a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm not surprised the first, that many times that I tried to leave, I was not successful. But one of the rhetorical arguments that I would hear back was, well, if you can't make this relationship work here with us, then you can't make it work with anybody. Ooh. Like, this is an example of your life, and it's going to be the same thing. You're going to keep doing it over and over again, so you might as well figure it out with us. And I was like,
and that is an example of a controlling narrative. That's an example of, I want to call it BS. Everybody has a capacity, to find a way to work out their relationships, and that is especially if there is a sense of dependence. Let that be a red flag. So we haven't used.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, I just want to jump in here and ask, first you, Veronica, and then also Gerette, like, what your experience was of your loved one's perception of you being in the cult. Like, we're talking about, like, losing a loved one to a controlling group or a cult, and yet there's also the thing of the person in the cult, and, like, what did the things that loved ones do that didn't work, that maybe drove you deeper into the group, and versus what were the things that helped you break free? Veronica, what was your love? What was it like to have? And I know you said you were very lonely, so maybe there weren't a lot of people in your life. But what did you notice maybe around your family?
So, I noticed that we made a trip to New York. I had some cousins there, and they had intellectual and some things that they would tell me. Well, tell the leader of this thing that you can't, that your brother-in-law who's a financial somebody or other says this and that, and none of the intellectual things mattered because we're going to work. And I was like, I can't do that. My godmother knew she could not say anything about this group, and that in order to continue to have me in her life and for me and for her to be in my life, she just had to be quiet and just be there and love me. And she saw me through. And when I got it together and I came to a place that when I decided to leave, I wrote to her and said, close my bank account, because they had wanted me to pay the rent on a place I was no longer living in, so that they could pretend, because there was rent control, that it was that I was still there. And so I asked her, I said, you're my power of attorney, close this. And she said she would. In fact, she never did, and it actually didn't matter. All that mattered was that the cult knew I was going to close it, and therefore they couldn't rely on it.
Right.
Is it okay if I pipe in?
Yeah. Is that okay, Veronica?
Here.
Yeah.
Veronica, the story with your godmother is so beautiful. And having that loving relationship, and there is like this sense of being quiet, keeping the connection, and also, we need to let them know that I will always be there, that you can turn to me at any point. Like that gesture is something that is so, so helpful for people who are in the group. And, like I said, it's not an easy thing to do, to have that kind of consistency. And I really want people to understand how draining it can be to witness somebody.
Right.
Like, in today's conversation, we're kind of going back and forth a bit. My lived experience is that of having been involved in the group, and now my professional experience is, of course, I bring that to the table every day, but it's also hearing the experiences of people who have witnessed their loved ones kind of lost. And that sense of lostness, like I can imagine, perhaps, Veronica, your stepmother, went through a lot.
Or the aunt,
in order.
I think it was, yeah.
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 Do you know anything about her experience, and while you were involved?
Well,
how that was
my
for her?
godmother.
Oh,
Yeah, she said it was difficult, but she knew that she couldn't influence me, but she couldn't reach out to me, but she could receive me when I reached out to her. And I just like to say, because I'll get off and let you guys continue, but what I found through this process was that nobody could rescue me from the outside.
Wow.
What had to happen was that I rescued myself from the inside. Because as long as I wasn't showing up in my life, and there was no me there when I was in the cult. I look inside, find your own. I look inside, there was nothing there. As long as I just lost my train of thought. As long as I didn't show up in my life, it didn't matter whose bidding I was doing. If someone tried to kidnap me to rescue me, then I would be doing what that person wanted instead of what this person wanted. But I still wouldn't have agency. I still wouldn't have shown up in my own life and be figuring out who I am and doing what I wanted.
Wow, good point.
And so leaving the country, and I was gone for a year, was not easy. And but in that difficulty, I found a resilience that I can always, throughout the rest of my life, go back to. And I know who I am now, and I know I am strong. And that came through my own actions. So I'd love to hear you guys discuss that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Veronica. I'm so glad you called.
Yeah, thanks for having this on your show.
Okay.
Having me on your show.
Of course, yeah. Well, thank you. Well, we have about 10 minutes. I want to get to what Veronica suggested there, but I also want to just see if Susan is still listening and you want to get on the phone. We have about 10 more minutes if you want to give us a call. 831-900-5773. Otherwise, Gerette and I will have plenty to talk about here in the last 10 minutes of the show. I just want to put that out as an option since Susan was trying to call earlier. Yeah, so Gerette, that was amazing to have Veronica call and share her story.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. And her instinct of separating, taking significant distance from the group is very, very important. once there is the recognition that what you're involved in is no longer helpful for you, is not healthy, and you want to get out, it's very important to create distance. Mm-hmm. And it's also important, just like Veronica was referencing, I could so easily do somebody else's bidding. It's also important to keep yourself distant from other groups or other individuals that might also have controlling influences. There's a phenomenon that we call cult hopping, where you might actually go from one group and go hop into another one. So that distance that Veronica described, by taking a year away and giving herself an opportunity to regain the autonomy that she had lost, mm-hmm. the agency that she had given away through her 8 years involved in that group. Right. That's a really important part of the recovery process. And oh my gosh, there's just so much more, mm-hmm. That we could talk about here.
Well, I just want to, besides Veronica's point about she was the one who got herself out, and that it wasn't up to her loved ones to get her out, and that there's something about that I hadn't really processed before, and that I'm thinking of these what are they called? Confrontation, or what are they called?
Intervention.
That's an intervention, where you get together and you tell the person everything they're doing wrong. That's controlling too. Maybe it might wake them up in a way, and yet maybe there might also just be well, now you're trying to control me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This is a whole big conversation, mm-hmm. A really big conversation. There can be situations where an intervention is appropriate. For example, where the person who's in the controlling group, where literally their life is in danger.
I see. Yes, true. Mm-hmm.
And so then an intervention might be the only way. Mm-hmm. And it might backfire, mm-hmm. but it also might work. The other point that I want to put out here is that we also never really know when some gestures, like Veronica's stepmother or any one of us, you with your friends, Catherine, who are, in groups. And I have a deeply, deeply beloved friend who is so involved in an evangelical Christian organization that she has alienated from her family completely, mm-hmm. Really lost those relationships that I also used to know well. That there's no time for my friendship with her anymore. Those things that we talked about, the time, the money, her finances are a mess. Mm-hmm. And yet the dedication to this group is immense and above all. So there is a way that when we experience people, or people we love, who we really care about in these kind of settings, that we know that we can recognize that sometimes it is okay to say something. And when the saying something is more in the form of a loving question,
okay. Mm-hmm.
or is more in the form of a gesture of connecting them with, like you were talking about at the beginning, Catherine, connecting them with something, that links you, whether it's, recipes,
right, it's common ground,
just really basic, simple things. Keeping that relationship, you never know what small gesture is going to help someone who's been indoctrinated to experience a crack in that wall. And that crack is something that, every time there's a crack, more, the proverbial crack that lets in the light.
Right.
So as loved ones, we have a lot of power, actually, to be able to stay engaged with them. I don't know if power is the right word, but we have the potential to be able to truly support them. And at the same time, I also think it's important for us to recognize when we need help.
Yeah, that's what I love about that checklist that we just went through of all, like, check, am I in a controlling group? What about my time, my finances, my relationship? That's like, when do we need help? That's a really concrete thing to look through, your time.
Exactly. And then also, when we're someone who has a loved one in a group, when do we need help?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes,
when do we need to do something for our own self? And that's what inspired me to create my latest course, which is a writing. A lot of my work focuses on writing, but creating a writing space for people who have lost loved ones to controlling groups. So it's a designated space for people in that category. So if you've, if you have a child or a sibling or a beloved friend who you feel alienated from and fear that they're involved or know that they're involved in a destructive, harmful, controlling group, having a place where you can process with other people can be, very helpful.
Right. And what is it about the writing format? What do you find? I know you do a lot of writing classes, and what is it that's so helpful there? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, right. I mean, on some level, like, writing for me has been just a huge part of my recovery process. And the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, who's a neuropsychologist who has, focused a lot on trauma, and he really brings out this idea of creating a coherent narrative. Like, wherever there's confusion, wherever there's trauma, to find coherence. Because if we leave ourselves in this state of confusion, we're likely to just kind of disassociate and, drift away. We can let our relationships slide by us and then, decades later say, oh, what happened? But if we're seeking coherence, if we're trying to understand what is happening from a truly mind open place, then, and we engage in writing, that process is powerfully integrative. Writing in and of itself integrates the nervous system.
Yes, it does. It's very powerful.
We can. It's a powerfully integrative, experience. It's not like writing is the only way to integrate. I think what's most important is to find things that are creative. The same could certainly be said for artistic exploration.
Yeah.
Of any kind, or music, or, movement, dance. Like, they are also integrative. It's simply that, my personal favorite is writing.
And certainly therapeutic support is always helpful, and our dreams. We really haven't talked much about dreams in this hour, and I know that the dreams are always working behind the scenes, and so that's one way that we're growing all the time. And I know you'd mentioned you had a dream, and I don't think we're going to get to it unless you just want to.
It's super short.
Oh yeah, well then maybe that could be our finishing thing to share the dream you had about this. Yes.
Yeah, just last night I dreamt of someone who was like an absolutely beloved friend of mine who was part of the same controlling group that I was in for 18 years. And in this dream, we are simply embracing each other.
Aww.
And he's a really kind of big guy, and my arms are just like spread, round, holding him, and his arms are entwined with mine, and I just am so grateful for this dream, because my love, for him, even though he's still involved, in the group, it doesn't matter. That it feels to me like this dream is like an embodiment of the gesture.
Wonderful.
that I bring in the world of just holding space and feeling so loved at the same time. Like, it's just gorgeous. Tell me what you think of that.
I think it's perfect. I think it's a perfect summary of how we can take care of our loved ones. Thank you so much for being on the show, Gerette. I'm sure we will have you back again. This is always a wonderful conversation. Gerette Buglion can be found at her website, GeretteBuglion.com, GeretteBuglion.com. Also, IGotOut.org, founder of the hashtag IGotOut. And her book is called An Everyday Cult. And there's also a podcast that Gerette hosts called, I believe, An Everyday Cult's Everyday People. Is that the right? Okay, wonderful. Yes. Thank you so much, Gerette. Take care.
Such a joy being here. Thank you, Catherine.
All right. Thanks. So next week, we will be talking about nightmares with Boston area psychotherapist Linda Yale Schiller, who will be talking about her newest book, PTS Dreams. Transform your nightmares from trauma through healing dream work. Tune in, listen to the live broadcast Saturday at 10, or catch the podcast replay, which will be released, as always, on the Monday following the show. I am Catherine Bell, and this has been the Dream Journal. Thanks for listening. You can find out about my own dream coaching practice at experientialdreamwork.com. Email me at Catherine@ksqd.org. That's KATHERINE@ksqd.org. Please contact me so we can talk about dreams, so I can let you know about my upcoming offerings. The Dream Journal is produced at the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, California. Archives and 24/7 live stream at ksqd.org. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review. I'd like to thank Rick Cleffel, engineer and music creator. You can find the ambient music at pandemia.com. I'd like to thank Tony Rosamano, Eva Milady, and join me next Saturday at 10 a.m.
But much more is right. We see in the darkness by shine.